On the day Kyle Brown married Vanessa Walker, I wore a pure white dress and went to an abandoned, unfinished building. Looking at the sunset in the sky, I couldn't help but smile happily. This was the most relaxed moment I had in all the years I stayed with Kyle. My phone was flashing nonstop, with countless calls coming in, as if trying to break my phone. I ignored them until Kyle's call came through. My heart skipped a beat, and with an inexplicable sense of anticipation, I answered the call. But as soon as I heard his cold voice on the other end, regret instantly washed over me. Kyle said, "Where have you gone? I'll send someone to pick you up." After a pause, he added, "Stop making trouble. Nessa is worried about you. You're her bridesmaid, her sister. Hurry up and come back." I suddenly laughed, laughing at my own naivety and at how foolish I was to still hold some hope for him. I softly said, "Kyle, if Vanessa knew that her bridesmaid, her sister, had slept with her husband for 6 years, would she collapse in despair?" My voice was hoarse, and Kyle fell silent. After a long pause, he spoke in a low voice, "Jasmine, don't do something stupid." Hearing Kyle's words, I wiped away the tears from my face and hung up the phone. In the distance, on the big screen of a tall building, Kyle's confession to Vanessa was rolling, and the whole city was immersed in the scent of roses, the grand wedding Kyle had prepared for Vanessa. But he forgot that I had severe pollen allergies. With this much pollen, I could go into anaphylactic shock and die on the spot. Of course, Kyle only had Vanessa in his heart. How could he think of anything else? I clutched my chest, which ached so badly, and I was hard to breathe. I mocked myself, so, my heart still aches for Kyle. How useless. Looking at the photos in my social media feed, where Kyle smiled gently at Vanessa, I felt a little dazed. I never knew Kyle could be so gentle too. It was completely different from the Kyle I remembered. The Kyle I remembered was always frowning, always keeping a distance from me. I remember once asking him why he acted so distant when we were in public, and I also remember his disgusted reply. "Everyone knows you're my adopted sister. If they find out we're together, what will they think of me? What will they think of you? You have no shame, but I still have some." I laughed quietly as I stared at the concrete floor below. If I jumped, I'd probably fall terribly, but I didn't care anymore. I just wanted to leave this world and Kyle. Kyle, hearing my laughter, asked angrily, "What are you laughing at?" I said, "Kyle, I want to go home." Upon hearing my words, Kyle grew even angrier. "Can't you stop being so reckless? If you keep doing this, you can forget about ever going home." I didn't reply. I just threw the phone downstairs and listened to the sound of it shattering on the concrete below. My heart seemed to break into pieces along with it. I thought, "Kyle, the home I want to go to is a place that belongs to me alone. It has nothing to do with you. It's a world without you. Loving you has been so exhausting. I'm giving you up, Kyle." I whispered, "I want to go home, system." I was Kyle's stepsister. 10 years ago, my mom brought me and Vanessa into the Brown family when she married Trevor Brown, becoming the mistress of the Brown family. That day, I wore worn-out clothes and stood beside my mom and Vanessa, feeling out of place in the luxurious Brown family mansion. I could sense the subtle discrimination from those around me. Trevor really liked my mom because she was his first love, so Vanessa and I were both raised as the cherished ladies of the Brown family. No, only Vanessa was the cherished daughter. I was still just the burden. My mom didn't like me. In fact, she even hated me. I wasn't particularly bothered by my mom's bias. After all, I wasn't the original Jasmine who stubbornly sought after a mother's love that didn't belong to her. I was an orphan, raised in an orphanage. Because I was too delicate and sensitive, no one ever adopted me. After struggling to graduate, I found a job, but then I was hit by a drunk driver and became disabled. I was really bitter about it. That was when the system approached me. It told me that if I successfully won Kyle over, I could return to my original world, become healthy again, and live a life of wealth and ease. At first, I treated Kyle as just an NPC to be conquered, but when I saw Kyle sneaking into my room on a rainy night, simply because I had casually mentioned I was scared of rainy nights, that dormant heart of mine suddenly trembled. I couldn't stop myself from caring about Kyle. I thought Kyle cared about me too, until I overheard him talking to his friends about me. I would never forget that day when Kyle went out drinking with his friends and forgot his phone. I brought it over to him, but overheard Kyle's friend ask him, "You and Jasmine have been together for 6 years. Why haven't you made it public? Is it because she's your stepsister? Are you worried about what others might say?" Kyle, holding his glass, looked obscure. He sneered and said, "I won't fall for a woman who throws herself into my bed. A woman like that is only good for a fling. Worry about what others say? No, I'm worried about Nessa finding out. Keep your mouth shut. Nessa is about to return. I don't want her to know about this." When he mentioned Vanessa, his expression softened immediately. Kyle's friends instantly understood his meaning, and so did I. Kyle went on to say, "I've been paving the way to my dad for years, so when Nessa and I finally get married, no one will dare criticize us." As I listened to Kyle's plans, my heart sank slowly to the bottom, cold enough to make me shiver. All these years, Kyle's plans weren't for me, but for Vanessa, my sister. Kyle also said, "Actually, no one would dare say anything. But I still worry about Nessa hearing gossip. I can't bear to let her suffer." Looking at the tenderness in Kyle's eyes, I couldn't hold back my tears. In all these years with Kyle, he had always told me that even though we didn't share blood, we were still like siblings. If we made it public, everyone would oppose us and look at us with the worst judgment. But it wasn't like that. It wasn't that Kyle didn't want to make it public. It was because he didn't care about me, and he didn't want to hurt Vanessa. I couldn't stand their laughter anymore. I left in embarrassment, and as I walked away, the rain began to pour. I got a high fever and lay dying on the couch, too weak to pick up my phone and call for help. At that moment, Kyle returned, but he only glanced at me, grabbed his phone, and hurried out. I was sure he saw my flushed face and knew I was sick because when he came close, he covered his nose and mouth, fearing that I might infect him. But he still left without looking back. The next day, after barely surviving, I learned that Kyle had hurriedly left because Vanessa had returned to the country. The system said, "The portal for your return is ready. You can jump now." I closed my eyes, about to jump, but then I heard noise downstairs. A group of thugs were pushing a young man around. Thanks to the system, I could see that the young man's face was covered in bruises, and his body was also injured. When they moved toward the rooftop, I quickly hid. I watched as the young man was pinned to the dusty ground, gasping for air. The thugs were landing punch after punch on him, and the muffled sound made my heart tremble. As I was still trying to figure out what to do, I saw the young man struggle to grab a steel bar lying nearby and managed to hit one of the thugs. But no matter how strong he was, he couldn't match the many hands against him. Just when he was about to be overpowered, I made up my mind and stepped forward, shouting, "Stop. I'll call the police." From a distance, I could faintly hear the sound of police sirens. The thugs looked at each other and then threatened the young man, "You're lucky today, but just wait for it." Once the thugs left, I sighed in relief. I whispered to the system, "Thank you." I had thrown my phone downstairs, so I hadn't actually called the police. The sirens were the system's doing. Looking down at the young man, covered in injuries, I decided to jump from a different spot, thinking that if I died here, it would affect him too. But just as I walked past him, the young man suddenly grabbed my skirt. He smiled at me and said, "Madam, you didn't actually call the police, right? Let me take you to my secret base." His smile was so wide that it pulled at the wounds on his face, and he winced in pain. I couldn't help but nod, and I followed him as he led me down the building. He didn't ask why I was wearing a dress in this abandoned building, and I didn't ask why he had been beaten. As we passed the broken phone, I hesitated for a moment but picked it up. Seeing this, the young man suddenly handed me a phone. When I gave him a confused look, he scratched his head and smiled. "This is my spare phone. You can use it for now, just in case someone is looking for you." I couldn't help but smile bitterly. My mom had always hated me, seeing me as proof of her past mistakes, wishing I would disappear from this world. And my half-sister, Vanessa, though she appeared to care for me, I could always see the hidden malice in her eyes. She hated me too. As for Kyle, he only had eyes for Vanessa. Today was their wedding day. He couldn't be thinking about me. For 10 years, I had been revolving around Kyle, without any real friends. No one would be looking for me. I didn't say anything, and the young man didn't either. He took me to a secluded warehouse, which was surrounded by flowers. I hesitated for a moment. With this much blooming pollen, I'd probably go into shock if I walked through it. Seeing my hesitation, the young man seemed to understand and said, "You're allergic to pollen too, right?" "Me too." At my confused look, he grinned. "These are all dried flowers with no pollen. Don't worry." Just then, the system spoke up. "Host, a temporary mission has been triggered. Apply medicine to Scott Adams' wounds. Reward, $1 million. The young man in front of me should be Scott Adams, the person the system mentioned. I hesitated for a moment and said to Scott, "Let me help you with your wounds." Scott paused, then quickly nodded with a smile, pulling out a first aid kit. I looked inside and saw that the medicine was all expired. I sighed. These medications are all expired. Scott didn't care at all, but said nonchalantly, "It doesn't matter. I've been using these for ages. As long as they don't kill me, it's fine." I reluctantly took out the spare phone Scott had given me and inserted my SIM card. I thought no one would be looking for me, but when I opened the phone, I saw dozens of messages. However, none of them were asking where I was. Kyle had called me over 10 times and sent more than 10 texts. All of them were scolding me for being reckless and making Vanessa upset. There were also a few messages from my mom, "If you don't come back now, then never." A couple of others were from Vanessa, pretending to care. I opened each message, deleted them, and blocked all of them. Once everything was dealt with, I smiled at Scott and said, "You shouldn't use expired medicine like this. The effects won't be as good." Then I placed an order for new medicine. When the delivery arrived, it came with a cup of hot chocolate. Scott handed it to me and said, "Hey, when you're feeling down, drinking something sweet will make you feel better." I took the hot chocolate, feeling its warmth in my hands. 1,000 thoughts flooded my mind. Kyle liked women with slim figures, so I had always controlled my diet carefully. I had never drank high-calorie drinks like hot chocolate, but when I saw Kyle lovingly hand hot chocolate to Vanessa, I realized that it wasn't that he liked women with slim figures. It was just that the women he liked happened to be slim. Snapping out of my thoughts, I saw that Scott had already put a straw in my hot chocolate. I took a sip. It was indeed very sweet, not really to my taste. I set the hot chocolate aside and bent down to treat Scott's wounds. That was when I noticed his ears were slightly red. He carried the smell of soap, which smelled clean and refreshing, not like Kyle, who always smelled of expensive men's perfume. Suddenly, my heart calmed down. Scott suddenly looked up and bumped into my forehead without warning. Seeing me touch my forehead with tears in my eyes, Scott panicked and quickly cupped my face, gently wiping away my tears. He then took out a bottle of herbal oil and carefully rubbed my forehead. His face was calm, but his ears were flushed red. Suddenly, an angry voice came from the warehouse door. "What are you two doing?